started. Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone, or as Shanika points out, maybe possibly good evening, depending on your definitions of these things, or what time zone your heart lies in. Welcome to the July 6th meeting of the Reimagining Public Safety Committee. Sorry, I have a lot of windows open here. There we are. I'll begin just by declaring that we do have a quorum present and may proceed, and then want to move immediately to public comment and ask if there's any member of the public who would like to participate in public comment. If so, just use the raise your hand function in your Zoom window, or if you have trouble with that tool, as sometimes I do, feel free to unmute yourself and just speak. Is there anybody from the public wishing to comment? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on.
Sorry, I didn't know I raised my hand.
Oh, there it is, right there, just directly in front of me. My apologies. We have public comment from Leslie Williams. What I'm going to do, Leslie, is just turn on a 3-minute timer here. With only one person seeking to give public comment, we don't need to be too rigid about it, but obviously want to set some parameters. So let's shoot for 3 minutes, and I'll let you know if you're approaching the end of that, but go ahead.
Okay, this is going to be much shorter than 3 minutes. I read the minutes from the last meeting, and I was very interested in your question about how we envision safety, which I think is an important question. And although I think anyone who's joined this committee probably realizes this, I just wanted it to be in the record that we acknowledge that race is a big determinant in how we see public safety, and that what is public safety for one group of people is often exactly the opposite for another group of people. And given that white people generally have more power in these situations, the safety of white people is prioritized at the expense of Black people, particularly Black men and Black boys. And we see that on campuses, we see that in all major urban areas. So when we talk about what makes people feel safe, we have to remember that we can't allow the feelings of safety for one group of people in power to make other people actually unsafe. So feeling unsafe is different from actually being unsafe. And that's all I had to say.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. And sorry, I somehow did not operate the Zoom correctly, so thank you for speaking up. We do have one other person seeking to give public comment, and that's Betsy Wilson.
Hi, everybody. I know this information because Sean so diligently posted it on his Facebook page, but I was really dismayed to see the most recent report on the EPD's annual report that we are still conducting traffic stops 9 times more often for African Americans than we do for white folks. And the disparity has actually gotten worse for Latino folks. So I think that just emphasizes the importance of this committee's work. And we know that as the more policing there is, the greater the effect of the racial disparities.
Thank you very much for that as well. Thanks to both of you for speaking up. Let me just quickly give a chance for anyone else seeking to give public comment as well. I believe there is nobody else. Let me just take this opportunity, because I think public comment can sometimes be an odd thing. People sometimes feel like we're saying these important things and not getting much of a response. In a smaller group like this, in addition to the fact that, per Leslie's point, these comments will be put in the public record, I think it's, I think the points that are being made, I think there's a reasonable expectation that they will be incorporated into the work of the committee and the discussion moving forward. And so I didn't want to just blow by without acknowledging that, but also didn't want to kind of give my own off-the-cuff reactions as though that's a useful way to speak for the whole committee. So thank you to both of you for what you've said, and I think that it's safe to assume that those points will be very much a part of our work going forward. So thank you. The next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes, and actually Evangeline will be unable to join us. She may be able to join late, but she had a commitment, that she could not move for the first portion of the meeting, but wanted to request a small change. There is a bullet in the minutes under it's item 3A. It's the second bullet refers to her, and she requested that the second sentence of that bullet be changed to the following, that it instead say, the framework of shared safety is everyone taking accountability to make sure that those who are most harmed in this community are best served. So with that request in mind, does anyone want to make a motion that we approve the minutes with that amendment?
So moved.
Councilmember Reed moves that that acceptance of the slightly amended minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
Patrick Heenan Devlin seconds. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? The ayes have it, and the amended minutes are adopted. Thanks to all of you for that. The next item, which will be, I think, the lion's share of our, I hope at least, the lion's share of our discussion today, comes from a point that Patrick raised at the very end of our last meeting. He said, listen, Daniel, you've kind of alluded to the importance of soliciting public input a bunch of times, but we haven't really talked about it. And, it's exactly the kind of thing that you can always allude to and never really dig in on if we're not intentional about that. And so I think that was a really important point. And so I wanted to reserve a lot of this afternoon's discussion for that. And I just want to real quickly, before I open it up, expand on that a little bit. We're obviously working on an area that is important to everybody. We're talking about safety of our whole community. And we are very, very effective, I think, at soliciting and hearing and incorporating the views of some. But I think we also have a track record, even as effective as we are at hearing what some people say, of sometimes missing what other people are thinking or feeling or wanting because they're perhaps less plugged into the communication channels that are so effective for some. And so I think we have a responsibility to try to break outside of that. We have a responsibility to do our best to communicate with the whole community, to give the whole community the chance to weigh in on the questions before us, and to really seek people out to solicit their input. Sometimes we do that through, we can have public meetings, both digitally and in person, and try to get people there. I'll say that when we tried recently to have public meetings on the 43 million American Recovery Plan Act dollars that have come to the city, by having childcare and translators present at one of those meetings, we got input from a population that, quite frankly, has not really been heard much by the city. And so I think your kind of traditional do a town hall in the Parasol Room and hope people show up is a great thing to do. I love those events, but I also know that you sort of tend to get the people next time who showed up last time. And I think even just in the traditional town hall modality, by being really intentional about how we reach out and what services we provide at the meeting, we can get different voices to feel that space is being given for them to be heard, and therefore to show up with the sense that their participation will be valued. Obviously we can try to hold very focused roundtables or even focus groups with specific communities. We've certainly done plenty of surveys in this community in the past. We can try to do that as well. But I think the question that underlies all of this is how do we lay out the information and the questions in the way to generate the most constructive input, the most meaningful response, and the most meaningful discussion? And are there partnerships with outside groups that focus on this kind of work that we want to pursue to make sure that we're, again, reaching out broadly, giving the whole community the chance to participate and the reason to feel confidence that their voice will be valued, and that we're setting up the discussions in a way that they can be as meaningful as possible. And so I'd like at this point to kind of open it up to see if anyone has given this question some thought, if anyone has any reactions, and if anyone has specific proposals about how we ought to be going beyond the public comment that we already allow for in every meeting to invite and incorporate public input in our work. So first of all, if folks, there's a little bit of feedback, so if folks who are not speaking don't mind muting themselves, that would be great. And second of all, Sarah raised her hand to speak.
I think that using social media is a super powerful tool in spreading what we're doing here, but I agree that that only reaches a certain amount of people. But I do think if each organization or center represented would share out on their own social media, if we were to like establish a shared document or wording of like breaking down what this committee is and what our goals are and who it's made up of, we could, in combination with social media, get people to canvas, or we as a group could canvas different areas of Evanston to just try and engage people in a quick dialogue, and give them information for how to tune into upcoming meetings and stuff.
Thank you, Sarah. So when you say, so just to make sure that I'm understanding, it sounds like you're saying produce a simple document that could be shareable both on social media and physically, and then share it everywhere that this group has access to on social media, but also then physically go door to door and essentially hand it out in an effort to reach a different set of people in that way. Is that?
Yeah.
Fair summary?
And the only reason I say like a document is I'm thinking in tandem with social media, we usually do flyer campaigns. So then hanging them up as well, just like something people could either read through their device or as they're walking through Evanston. And then, yeah, in addition, physically go speak to people.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have any reaction to that? And again, I've sort of alluded in talking about this a few different times. You know, different people in this group have different access to networks. You know, some are members of organizations that have large memberships. Others are elected officials that have large constituencies, and you know, and others are involved in nonprofit organizations that provide services to individuals. Do any of you have reactions to Sarah's suggestion or other thoughts about the way in which it would be constructive and appropriate to reach out through the networks that you've already established through the work you do to try to solicit further input into our work?
Yes, I do. Good evening, everybody. This is Betty Esther, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of like forced today. I think Sarah's idea are wonderful, and that is something that you do, and it would reach more people. And right now, doing the kind of door-to-door stuff to meet people, we will rather gain meeting more people and everything, because for one, people have had really no contact with people, and that's something that they are kind of starving for, is for information as to what is going on. Give me input and everything. You do have different groups that have started back meeting, and one of them is with the senior foster group. The other one is a group down at the Levy Center. And then you have your parent groups with the after school programs that we would have in the one that they have over at Family Focus. And their meetings usually is about 6 o'clock because they have it at during the time that they come in to pick up their kids so they don't have to come back out. And the other thing is, I know we have Mr. Campbell as part of the group, and if he could help us to get in touch with the PTA and have the PTA to help us to disseminate this information to their core people in it that is in their system and in the school system. We usually don't have access to that too much. So, because now they contact the parents and things via email, and sometimes that's the only emails the parents look at is the one that's coming from District 65. So we need to look at who's here and what is on. And I know they say, well, we need to contact our churches and everything. It is sad to say that the congregation with most of our churches are people that do not live in Evanston. So they used to, but they don't now. So we wind up having a very small congregation members that are here in Evanston. But we can't give it to the churches because the people will not go to the church, but they will watch the church Zoom and their messages and stuff. So they are getting it, and it is through social media. So we just have to make sure that we give everybody that is doing a social media kind of contact with the public, with the community.
Thank
That's
you.
all.
Thank you. And I will say that Marcus is one of the folks who's unable to make it today, so he can't respond directly to that, but I think that'll be a natural conversation for us to have. I see there's some folks who are not members of the committee who want to jump in, and of course we'll make space for them. But I also want to first just make sure that we've created an opportunity for everyone who's a part of the committee itself to speak. I don't know if Patrick, who had initially raised this, wanted to chime in here, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts as well.
Sure, I'll chime in. So in doing youth advocacy work and engaging in youth advocacy work in Evanston for now nearly 10 years, I have seen youth engagement done well, and I've seen it done really poorly, and I've been involved in both efforts where it's been done well and it's been done not so well. And Daniel, you were referencing at the top, rightfully so, the city's recent push to receive community input for the American Rescue dollars. And I think it's good for us to all sit for a moment and think about, okay, when have we successfully engaged community? I guess it's also really good to think about when we haven't done it well, because there's lessons there too. But I'm looking at Betty Bogg. You know, we're part of this youth collaborative in Evanston, and when we have needed to go out and solicit input from young people, first off, we've hired young people to go out and solicit that information from other young people. So I realize this committee doesn't have a budget, but that has been incredibly helpful to be able to pay young people and value them for their time and their skills. So that's one. Two, we then compensate the young people who participate in the in the focus group or in the interview. And, I know we have an academic on this call, so I don't know if that invalidates, but I think that can be kosher to compensate people for their time participating in defining shared safety and the distinction between safety and security. And Daniel, you pointed out that you remove barriers where you can. I mean, we've also, whenever we held focus groups, we provided childcare, we provided dinner. I mean, we tried to think about timing, and so thinking through all those things obviously increases participation. And then the last thing I'll say is when we have engaged as an organization in community outreach to help define our mission, our scope, our programming, whatever, we've relied on experts who have guided us, and we have many in our community. Gila Logan, we have actually at the Moran Center, we have Pam Citronbaum. We have people in our community who are really expert at engaging community in productive, thoughtful, focused discussions about where we should be moving as a community. So those are just a few ideas from my little part of the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think one place where the city has historically sometimes fallen short is in engaging in some of that expertise in the community that doesn't reside on the city payroll, but nonetheless is right here and eager to help. And I think that's good.
Ooh, and before you call on Sean, I am embarrassed that I didn't mention somebody who's on this committee, which is Nathan Norman, who, I mean, is just an incredible connector. So I didn't mention his name, and shame on me for not doing that.
Sean.
I want to amplify everything that Sarah and Betty and Patrick shared, especially I was thinking about last year when there was a lot of community involvement in the conversation about what should public safety look like and what do we want for how we invest our city dollars. And one of the things that I recall one of our youth activist leaders saying to a public leader was, if you want to know what people think, definitely, go there and ask. And then I was reflecting on also last year, after some tragedies, there was a formation of the Black Male Alliance, of which Nathan Norman, if I recall correctly, is a part of, who went door to door to basically connect and solicit and offer help, and I thought that was amazing. And so I think the idea of connecting with organizations that already exist in order to capture their audiences and get their feedback, say through town halls, through Evanston Live TV, or through organizations such as Opal or Cabbage or Evanston Fight for Black Lives. I know also hosted an engaging town hall around the elections. But another thought that came to mind was having walking town halls, specifically within each ward, if that makes any sense whatsoever. I was just thinking about accessibility, and sometimes technology can be hard for people, and sometimes travel and organizing around work can be difficult for folks as well. And so being able to establish essentially a town hall where we go to meet the residents of each ward and solicit their feedback is basically the idea that popped up in my mind, and certainly falls in support of what Sarah Bogan suggested.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Andy.
Yeah, just quickly, I wanted to, I think all these suggestions are really great, but I just wanted to say that Patrick's suggestion about using young people to collect that information and also making that a learning and employment opportunity for those doing it, it's a great idea. And Black Youth Project 100 in the University of Chicago does this quite effectively. And it gets young people into spaces we want them to be, and also gets them a set of skills. So I'd be happy to talk through that on the side if that's something people want to do. But it's a great model for getting young people's voices, but also providing skills and services and opportunities for folks. I get a lot of emails, get 2 today from ETHS students looking to help out to do stuff. I think it's a potential, does a lot of things the committee has been talking about. So I'd be happy to have that conversation in terms of what I know about it.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. I think that'd be really helpful. Both aspects of the offer. I think as we're coming in contact with people on the outside who are interested in helping, I think this is a very, very natural place to seek help. And I'm also curious about your reaction to Patrick's kind of comment about, he sort of alluded to you as an academic of would you look askance at offering compensation for and I guess the answer to that, but do you have thoughts about what from the point of view of really being of comprehensive and fair and representative, what kind of techniques we ought to be thinking about and considering, and what we ought to be maybe staying away from?
So I'll just be brief and say there are lots of ways to think about reaching people that are hard to reach or less engaged. I mean, we can do it, in terms of being representative. I depends on what the goal is. I think part of the goal that we hear is not just being representative, but boosting the voices of folks we don't often hear as well. So you can balance all those things out. I'm not going to pretend there's a single answer. I think it's worth a conversation, but there are lots of ways to do that. And one way I think is to engage young people to engage other young people, but also thinking about the other parts of the population who avoid systems, right? People who might be undocumented and so on and so on. There are many, many instances, but I think there are ways to deal with it. And we've done it before. So in lots of contexts. So I'm happy to be a part of those conversations, but it might get a little nerdy, but I'm happy to do that as well.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. I've never complained about nerdy before, and I'm not going to start now. Are there others, and certainly others who want to speak? Oh, Councilmember Fleming has her hand up.
Oh, thanks. So I missed a little bit, but I'm going to guess what the conversation is and add my comment and tell me if I'm wrong. So I think, speaking to young people, paying people for their opinion, all those things make a lot of sense. I think my step back would be, what are we asking them? And do we really want to hear what they have to say? Because everybody on this call has given examples of going out to ask people their opinion, and young and old, and paying and not paying, and childcare and all those things. And when I hear from some people in the Black community, they're like blue in the face from answering these surveys and telling people what they think, because they don't see us doing anything different, right? And so I guess I just would have us think through before we did anything, like, what are we really asking? How are we going to use their opinion? Like, are we going to do something with what they say? I mean, this happened several years ago when we started Equity and Empowerment Commission. We sent a staff out to do all this stuff and ask people all these questions. And I remember going to Fleetwood with them, and like every elder who was at that meeting just gave a handful of times in which, since the 50s and 60s, they have gone to EEOC and all these different things the city had asked them to participate in, and they would tell you like nothing happened since that time, right? And so I think particularly when we talk about, hopefully we don't use the term marginalized or disenfranchised and all those other things, but when we talk about reaching out to people, I just want us to be very honest about what we're asking of them, even if we're paying them, and are we going to do anything with it? I mean, I think we would all say that is our goal, but I think that is not always what happens, and we just continue to make the divide between government and people much larger. And so I would even encourage us to look at what we already do know, which is why I didn't want to be on the data team. So let's look at what we already do know, because there's a lot we probably can assess about how people feel about public safety based on their race and income and age and a lot of different things that we can start, plucking away with right now without going out to do a whole new community engagement campaign.
Yeah, point taken. I mean, we've got a lot of accumulated, well, people have learned a certain lesson about the extent to which their point of view is taken seriously, and that's not going to be unlearned overnight, right? So I take that point. Is there anybody else who, and there's one person I'm going to call on in a second, but is there anybody else who wants to speak to this in general, or kind of specifically could speak to the work they've already done through the network they've assembled through their own kind of professional life to bring public input to the table in the city? So any last comments on this from anybody?
Yes, I guess I'm not working this right with the hand, so I'm gonna stop.
No, go ahead. If you go, feel free to speak up.
Yeah, y'all can do a lesson in the community to teach the seniors how do you work this Zoom thing, so when we get on, we can see and we not see. But that's beside the point. That's not what you're asking. But that is a service, because we need to think about what do we need? What do we want? And one thing in working with the Citizens Network of Protection, we have community meetings. In our community meetings, we have usually are about what people says they want to see or to understand. And in reference to, since we're talking about public safety, dealing with the police department. And one of the things that the young people wanted to see and to know is, how do they pat down somebody? So are they doing it right? Because we don't think that they just patting you down, they are filling you up. And we said, okay, so let's have them come to show us what they say is the proper way to do that. So we had 2 police officers come and demonstrate it, and we had other, and from that meeting, and they did go to the Human Service Committee to talk about how our officers was doing the pat down, and that some of them was not doing it properly. So we reached out to the community, what do you want? So they gave us that information. We took it to the Human Service to help them to look at and to instruct the officers to do a change. There was several complaints that did come out of that, and things did change, because what we learned from that was a problem, not just here in Evanston, but countrywide. So they was doing this like, okay, not appropriate. So there was a couple of court cases and things to help bring about the change. So we asked that. The other thing in looking at public safety, so they said, well, you tell us that you have this information and we can get it. And you have what is called a dashboard. Nobody knew how to use the dashboard, and even I don't understand. But we did them a community thing and had them to come out and to demonstrate what was and how to use the dashboard and how to get information from that. And from that, the police department learned that, okay, all of that information that you have on your dashboard is incorrect. So they made changes, they started changing, and we are still working with the police department. We will be sending them something soon. What they asked for from us is things that the people would like to see on the dashboard, and information that they are gathering from doing these tickets and citations with these different events. So that is a change that will shortly happen, hopefully, with the police department. But what we gather is things that we get from the people that come to our meeting, that we see, and we talk to them when we go to other meetings and things. So it does help, and even more so when you can do that one-on-one. And we didn't say, well, would you like to see this or would you like to see that? We asked them, what do they want? And our question has always been, what do you want to happen? And so that's kind of how we got started. And the 15-year process of coming up with an oversight proposal is from listening to the people as to what they want and trying to understand things. And when they have different programs, and like the one that Patrick had worked on in earlier, and came up with an ordinance. Did y'all do an ordinance of the alternative to arrest? And it kind of dealt with in arresting young people at a certain age and everything. They see these things, they hear this, and sometimes when they are reading or listening to at the council meeting, they don't really understand all of what is going on because they are not there to ask questions. So we try to bring those individuals to the community so that they can ask the question. It's fine, like we have in this committee, and we gather all of this information, and then we say, well, this is what we gathered and what we think we heard that you want to happen. But then to validate that is then taking it back to the community and asking them, this is what we came up with, this is what we said we would do. It's this meeting what you was looking for or what you need. So like Cicely said, you have to go back and you have to ask. And just asking them what they want is kind of not always getting really what they are looking at. Ask them what kind of in contact you have had, since we're talking about public safety, with the police department, that's good, bad, or fair. And what do you want changed? What did they do that you needed them to do? So that's how we get information for our community meetings that we air.
Thank
And we
you.
will have one coming up this month, and that one will be we doing the thing on alternative to calling the police.
Great. Thank you so much. And if you want to send that, details of that meeting around, I'm sure others in this committee might want to attend. Before we move on from this, I wanted to call on Deputy Chief Secluti, because, obviously the police department itself grapples with the question of what does the public want? And I wanted to give her a chance to speak to how EPD thinks about that question, what EPD does to get public feedback and input and hear from a broad variety of the public. And obviously there are some people in the public who really make their views known, and then others who kind of sit back. And I'm wondering what the department has done to make an effort to hear from everybody.
I thank you, Mayor Biss, for that. For us at the police department, it's really important that we're transparent, that everyone in the community, regardless of, where you're from, what ward, what beat you live in, that everyone has a voice. And there are several platforms where people can express their opinion and talk to us. Most of these are community meetings or ward meetings, and these are by and large headed up by the council member. And with that, we usually have the ward officer attend, along with a supervisor from our Community Strategies Bureau. So that's one of the best ways that we're able to communicate and have a dialogue with citizens in various neighborhoods. We also, as far as receiving complaints or even compliments, all of those are filtered through either the Chief of Police office or our Office of Professional Standards. Anytime anyone has something complimentary to say, they could fill out a form online or they can call, and all of this information gets trickled down our chain. As far as complaints or concerns, or if somebody calls and says, hey, I just wasn't satisfied with the police service that I received, all of these are looked at and investigated. It depends what type of investigation is set based on if somebody wants to be known and doesn't wish to remain anonymous and wants to file a formal complaint, then obviously we look at that. And if somebody else just wants to make a complaint or has an inquiry but doesn't necessarily require a follow-up, those are still investigated and looked at by immediate sergeants that are at the command of the officers that work for them. So a couple of questions, there are a couple of questions there, but what I want to stress is that it's important for us to hear everyone's voice, but there are many times that we don't get a chance to do that. But one of the main ways we try to communicate with the public is by having these ward meetings or neighborhood meetings, or sometimes it doesn't have to be a ward meeting if something comes up, and then there's a community meeting. We try to communicate in that regard as well.
Great, thank you. And I, at some point I think the concern that I would have is that ward meetings would tend to draw the same group of people back again and again. I'm curious, has that been your experience, or have you found that sometimes there's really a meaningfully rotating attendance?
From my own personal experience, we do have frequent familiar faces all the time. I think depending on what's going on in the city, the type of crime, how interested people are wanting to learn about what's actually going on and what the police involvement is, then sometimes that changes the dynamic too. And also I wanted to add another way that we really try to communicate with the citizens is by social media. I'm not sure if everyone's aware, but we do have, a Facebook account, a Twitter account, and depending on the information, sometimes there's information that's posted on those media outlets as well.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Patrick.
There we go. And then I'll lower my hand. I want to circle back to something that Councilmember Fleming said. I think we can take a both and approach, and I think if we don't, we'll look silly and actually maybe even worse, cause additional harm if we don't take into account what Councilmember Fleming broadcasted and warned us about. And so throwing this out there as an idea, I remember actually Councilmember Fleming again back in, I think it was December of 2019, pre-pandemic, brought the Alliance for, I think it's the Alliance for Safety and Justice, which is the who authored the blueprint for safety that we reflected on as a committee at one point to facilitate dialogue. And so I'm curious if the city might be able to contact those authors and see if there is some train the trainer module that we could, and I realize it is a more in-depth process, but is there some manner by which we can model a collection process? And going back to what Andy and I were talking about too, is in employing young people to be the facilitators. So I would say, let's circle back to those authors and see if there's some type of facilitation that might be willing to offer, and or some train the trainer model that we could then employ young people to lead and engage in, trying to help us as a community define what safety is. And then emphasizing what Councilmember Fleming was speaking about, we do have information. I know we do. I've been in this community long enough to know that we have solicited as a city information about and opinions from community members about safety and policing, and we had a process in hiring Chief Cook. Are there things that we can pull out of those conversations to further drive our work? And I will say too, I promise I'm landing the plane, that I do think that we are all here to some extent working, knowing historically what community members have told us, what our constituents have told us. And Daniel, I think that's why you formed the groups that you formed, and why we're so. I think it is a both and approach, that we can engage community in this exercise, and as Ms. Esther was saying, that maybe in doing so we create the infrastructure to go back to community with the work product that we've hopefully developed, and said, look, we did this with some understanding of what you wanted, some understanding of shared safety through a facilitated process, and we still need your feedback on the work product that we've developed. All right, and now I'm going to be quiet, but those are just my thoughts on reflecting on what everyone else said.
Well, thank you. I think those are important points. The people who I'll turn to for input on your specific suggestion regarding the Alliance for Safety and Justice are Councilmember Fleming and Evangeline, and if either of you want to pipe in now, feel free, but I'm happy to talk offline as well and explore that. But I think that suggestion is a very, very attractive one. And certainly, as you said before, and as others said, including young people in these discussions as leaders, providing them with both the training and support, and then also the trust and authority to be leaders in the discussion, I think is a must-have.
And I think for the sake of time, I'm happy to, probably Evangeline is even more well-equipped than I am, but maybe we can talk about the particulars. I'm happy to share what I can from the trainings we did in the 9th ward with the groups. I can get into Shanika so she can share them with the group so people understand what Patrick's talking about. But probably just makes more sense for the sake of time to talk offline about connecting with the group and seeing if they even do that type of thing.
I think that's right, and I've made a note to reach out to you, so we'll have certainly something for the committee next time as the outcome of those discussions. So thank you, Patrick. So you're of course right, Council Member. It's time to move on to the next agenda item. All three working groups have had their first meeting. Obviously, they're just getting off the ground, but I wanted to, both for the purposes of sharing what occurred in those discussions, and then also just to establish the habit and rhythm, I wanted to ask each of those groups to quickly report out feedback on what occurred in their first meeting. And I want to begin with Councilmember Burns, who is chairing the group that's rethinking the organizational structure and really re-envisioning what a police department could look like. So council member?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think the hardest part is getting into full character. And what that means in our group is imagining a city that does not have anything currently in place, and really, urging the group and urging myself and everyone to, there's a reflex to want to start with something that exists because we can fully contextualize it and we understand it. And it's like, nope, nothing exists right now, right? Let's do an exercise of thinking about what would we create if we were creating it from scratch today. And so we were thinking about where do we start? And I think everybody was like, all right, well, let's see what type of, legal and statutory restrictions and limitations that we have that we must start with. And then how does that impact the criminal parts of the criminal code that we can either decide to enforce or not enforce, the parts of the criminal code that we can adjudicate versus decriminalize. And we're just trying to find a good starting point for this work. And we have a meeting this Friday where we'll, consider a framework to begin the work. I think that was the big thing that came out of it. I welcome anybody else in the group to chime in about some of your thoughts, but I know the main ask was what are our limitations, and that's the work that we're going to figure out on Friday and work with staff to try to make that determination before the next committee meeting.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. The next group is really the breaking down data about patrol and traffic enforcement group. And we had, I think, a really robust back and forth, just trying to educate ourselves in discussion, not only with Deputy Chief Secluti, who was generous enough to give her time, but also with Sarah Jones from the police department, just to really help us understand what data sets are available. And it was sort of a difficult conversation because I think our questions at this point are enormously broad, and the feedback from the department has been, well, hey, help narrow the questions for us so we can answer them more specifically. And our responses will tell us what the available options we might ask about are before we even know how to narrow the question. And they've, we've really put a lot on them, frankly, in terms of giving us information about what kind of data requests will result in constructive, clean, and useful replies. And so we have an action plan in place, and we're moving forward, and would hope at the next time our full group gets together to be able to give you kind of more substantive reply to the direction of data request and analysis that we're pursuing. So with an acknowledgement that we're putting an awful lot on our EPD team, I just want to express appreciation for your commitment to help us through this, and I feel like we're on a good path there. The last group is the violence prevention and interruption group that Andy was chairing. Andy, are you?
Yeah.
I'm in. Thanks.
So I'll just do a quick summary, and obviously if the other members, if I missed something or misstated, please jump in. The group actually wanted to start and we really try to understand its scope and what it was hoping to do and where it was hoping to start. There was a general consensus among the group members to focus really on frontline violence prevention efforts, recognizing that there are all sorts of violence and structural issues that are in place that sustain these things, but kind of decided that the focus will be on things like a trauma response, violence interruption, outreach, and so on. That would be the general focus of the group, keeping in mind there are all these bigger things. Also keeping in mind that there are lots of types of violence, suicide, self-harm, others, intimate partner violence. So we'll try to kind of focus on, sort of interpersonal violence, more more specifically, but that's kind of where the group is going to give its focus on. The other kind of two key elements which the group generally agreed on, one was trying to meet people and understand about violence and where it happens, meeting people where they're at in schools and neighborhoods and public spaces and so on, and understanding what sorts of interventions do that. And second, centering the voices and experiences of survivors and victims, as well as just victims of, say, fatal violence, remembering the folks who are experiencing and living with trauma every day in the same places and spaces that things happen. The sort of tasks that we're looking for next, in addition to finding a meeting time, big thanks to Shanika, by the way, who's been helping with all of this, is trying to understand and the sort of what's the current state of opportunities and assets in Evanston, as well as some of the history of different things that have happened. Again, a big thanks to all our members of the committee who have deep knowledge of this. So we're going to try to generate some sorts of lists and history to see what currently exists, to look sort of what opportunities are there. I think I captured most of the general points that we covered in this first meeting, but I think that's going to be the main focus in the next couple of meetings we have.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Doreen has been waiting to speak, and I will call on you. But before that, just quickly to Shanika, our next meeting is 2 weeks from right now on Tuesday, July 20th at 4 p.m. I know that when we first started, there was some hope the city would have a kind of a reopening policy that could enable for hybrid meetings by July. Do you have an update on what's possible on that front, Shanika?
Yeah, definitely. The last time I checked in with Deputy City Manager Kimberly Richardson, and I think she might have sent out an email to, I don't know if it was internal or not, but just letting us know that for now, meetings will be, outside meetings will continue to remain virtual or hybrid, depending on capacity and things of that nature, until we all come back and start letting the public back into the buildings. And so that just, creates for a space of non-bias, like why does this committee get to come in, but this committee doesn't, and et cetera, et cetera. So we're still playing it by ear on that. But for now, it would either remain virtual if you all choose to stay completely virtual, or some form of a hybrid where we'll pull IT in to kind of make it make sense. And for those of you who've attended ward meetings, or for those council members who host their own ward meetings, will know that it can be a little of a challenge doing hybrid, but it's not impossible. So it's just a matter of what makes sense for the committee in general, until we either can come back in person full capacity.
Well, when we first met, I know there were a lot of people who really were hoping for in-person or hybrid. So would you mind sort of looking into what a hybrid option would look like for us, so we can present that to the committee and see if they want to migrate to a hybrid? I know that all in person was not what everyone wanted, but enough people wanted some in person that a hybrid might be the right solution.
Yeah, and I honestly can answer that question now and kind of tell you what that would look like. So basically, those who choose not to be in the room, whatever space that we choose to, whether it's like Robert Crown or a space that would have to make sense, obviously, or the Parasol Room, you would be online, and therefore whoever's hosting, so Mayor Biss, for this meeting, let's just say this is hybrid, you would have to, pay attention to the fact that you have guests on the monitors, which will be set up by our IT guys to make sure that everyone can be heard. And of course, staff person could be on, like, so me, for example, I would be online to make sure that the hands that are raised from the public or committee members, I can then chime in and say, hey, we have a question from whoever, right? And making sure that we manage that as well. We've only done these so far with, of course, council meetings and ward meetings so far. So the recording option will still be there, of course, to record what's being said. I'm not sure how well that the people online will hear the recording of those in the room. So that's something else that we would have to kind of think through. But again, it's not impossible. It's just a matter of what you all are willing to fight for.
Okay. Thank you so much. It's helpful. I'll send an email out to the group, or you can, to get feedback, so we can respect the wishes of the group in terms of exercising that option or not. And I know we're at 5, but there are 2 members of the public who still want to speak, and so I want to to respect that before I adjourn the meeting. Those are Doreen Price and Leslie Williams, and Doreen has been very patient throughout the meeting. So let me call on you first, with apologies for the delay.
No apologies. It's a privilege to participate in this in any way, shape, or form. So thank you, all of you. A team is a team, and I value teams really. I mean, they're kind of very, what do you call it, germane to my being, because I worked in teams before, and you can accomplish so much more. In terms of punitive versus restorative justice, I think it would be good, from listening and knowing the things I do know, that a switch from punitive to restorative begins conversations of people who have been felt in very bad situations for whatever reason with regard to punitive justice, including being afraid to open a door. So I think it would be sensitive to the community to reach out in terms of looking at restorative justice options as a positive endeavor. The second thing is the underutilization of social workers. I know for a fact, speaking to some social workers myself, that there's a huge group of people needing very similar things, and they're just dying to be heard. And there's not a conduit for that. So making that, or even including them in some respects for your outreach efforts, is great, because social workers really know how they have to address people at their very common core, very common center of humanity. And that's where you get really honest, truthful evaluations, and lots of times brilliance when you tap into that areas, as a professor, Mayor Biss. So that part would be very good, and it would be a safe way, and it would be really looking at ways that I'm sure many of the social workers would prefer in terms of trying to be restorative to a community they're trying to help heal. And like what was done for juvenile justice was huge and great, and just to be continued and go in that direction, keep moving in the direction you're going, and apply it to adults. Then the last is about how you personalize and what's in common. When someone brings up an issue, they may have lots of different issues that interrelate with other people, and it doesn't come out, or if you're speaking alone at a particular time, but lots of other people think the same thing, you don't have that, support. So it's very scary coming up, saying something and being afraid, were you really heard or misheard or whatever. And that, again, personalized, as you were talking about, is very essential. And I think the social work, it goes back to a social worker doing the canvassing, even if you want to call it canvassing, but the exploration and reconnection, it can make it, not make it, but really, really aim to be part of a remediation process, really an extension of what we're already doing with regard to communities that are underserved. And we're talking about underserved residents. It's the same thing. And so it crosses over wards, and like taking wards alone doesn't really address the issues across all wards. And again, thank you, Mayor Biss and the team.
Thank you so much. And Leslie.
Thanks again for letting me take you over the time. I just wanted to go back to the issue of police speaking at ward meetings. So I went to the 7th ward meeting a couple of weeks ago, and there were discussions of things like, fireworks and people down at the beach who shouldn't be down there. And the answer from the police was always, call the police, call the police, call the police. Whatever you see, call the police. And I know that there's been a lot of discussion about alternatives to policing, encouraging people to think about the consequences of calling the police, particularly about calling the police on young men and women of color. But that is not what I'm hearing at the ward meetings. And so I feel as though there's some sort of cognitive dissonance between what we say we want in terms of security and the message that is actually being delivered at the ward meetings. And I think that that is something very important for this committee to think about.
Thank you. Point well taken. Thank you for that. So with that, we've reached the agenda. We've crossed the 5 o'clock hour, and I appreciate everyone for their indulgence of that. As I indicated, the next meeting will be in 2 weeks, but I think all of the working groups will meet between now and then. And I just thank everybody for their participation in this